Hey heroes, Cole's here. Today I'm doing the passive pet tier list. So what are the best passives for your pets in Heroes vs Swords? I'm going to go through each one of these guys. There are no like incredibly awful passives here, so I went SABC and I'll walk you through all of them. Just kind of have all the pets down here at the bottom. We'll go through one by one. So we'll start here. We have the Thornhoof, the little pig guys. Their passive is an increase to movement speed. This you can use early in the game. Say early in the game, you have this guy as one of like your normal pets. And then you have something like Emberpaw as your main pet. Emberpaw needs to like go in melee and like swipe at people. Having another pet that increases the movement speed of your active pet can actually be helpful. It'll let Emberpaw get in and start like attacking more horde more quickly. Not like a great, you're not gonna really use, I haven't figured out a use for this pig guy post that early game, but early in the game, if you only have him and Emberpaw and a couple other, then perfectly fine to use in the early game to like increase Emberpaw's movement speed and increase his DPS. Crystalsaurus has an S tier passive. Summon random meteors to rain down across the battlefield, each dealing 50% damage upon impact. So we have one of the problems here is that 50% damage upon impact doesn't say if it's weapon damage, pet damage, or passive pet damage. I'm pretty sure based on the rest of this stuff that it's passive pet damage. And so if your Crystalsaurus has a high level, then this additional rain damage will be a lot of damage and it'll be strong. This is just a overall damaging passive. So let's say you have like a high level Basilisk as your main, and then you finally get Crystalsaurus from an enchanted egg and you get him up to level 100, you can swap him in and use him as your passive pet instead of something like Emberpaw or Pyrokraken. So like a very, very strong passive, and like as you're leveling him up to like make him your main pet, use him as your passive pet. Snails actually have great passive. It is super underrated and you use it a ton in nightmare mode. What it does is it adds 15% additional health for your hero. So it doesn't impact your pet, it impacts your hero. It's I think the only passive to do so. It increases your hero's health by 15%, and you can run two different snails. So if you run a green snail and a red snail, you can get 30% increase to your health, which is huge. That's really, really important in nightmare mode, and especially for heroes that have things that scale off of their max health, like Werebeast or Shield Warden or Warlord. All of these like really, really good nightmare heroes have abilities that scale off of max health, and so this will help them scale even more. So Snail is a great passive for nightmare mode, which is like late game content. Like if anything does damage, that's better, but he's fine otherwise. Shellshock has a very good passive. It adds 2 spinning turtle shells that each do damage. Again, the issue here is this is really poorly worded, and I don't even know if it's active pet or passive pet damage. He's the kind of pet that if you got him, you're gonna have leveled up pretty high. He's like a fun pet to use, and so I would feel free to like use his as like the second passive. The turtle shells spin around your main pet, so it'd be better if the main pet is melee. So it's better to use in tandem with like Crystalsaurus or with Emberpaw or some other pet that's gonna like be in the middle of the horde and is not ranged. So something to keep in mind with Shellshock. Basilisk actually has what is technically either the top or the top 2 best passives in the game. Unfortunately, it's invisible. So what Basilisk does is it adds a 20% increase chance of critical hit for your active pet. So if you're using Crystalsaurus or Pyrokraken or somebody as your main pet, this will increase their chance for critical strike by 20 percentage points. That is like roughly a 10% increase in their damage, which is really big. Like you can't get that large of a damage increase literally from anywhere else, except for maybe in Blazetail's passive. We'll get to him. That probably does more damage. But next to that, and Blazetail is incredibly hard to get. This is an excellent pet passive, and so one that you're gonna want to use a lot. You got a Lotus Blossom. These things are like here. So these kind of like Striker, these great pets offer decent passives that like, again, use them early in the game. Their passives add the ability to pick up a plant on the ground that will then give your pet the ability to like do some kind of elemental damage or a stun or a freeze. So think like an Earthstriker, but like you have to go pick up a plant first before you get the effect. I think that technically makes them worse than the Strikers because you need to like actively acquire their passive abilities like on the battlefield, but like perfectly fine to have early in the game. So we'll move him down to like a low B. Emberpaw's got a great passive. So it's a rare right? They're rare. This snail guy is here. Let's say Emberpaw somewhere here. Emberpaw gives the active pet a permanent ember fur aura that deals 30% of the passive pet's damage. So here, like, they clearly say out passive pet's damage. It makes it like much easier to understand. But basically what happens from happening is you get like a fire orb type area around your active pet that deals damage. So if your active pet is melee and or just like stuck in the middle of all the horde, then this will just do an additional 30% of the Emberpaw's damage as damage. So this is really good in Nightmare mode when all of the horde are stuck around you. It's also good on Crystalsaurus when the Crystalsaurus is like running towards the horde and getting like in the melee. It's less good on something like Pyrokraken or on Basilisk, where like they stay kind of in the middle of the battlefield attacking ranged. You want to pair this with something that's melee is the big thing here, or in an event or a type game mode where like the pet is standing on top of horde. Next is Cloudhoof. So I don't have Cloudhoof. I've never seen anyone use Cloudhoof as a passive. If you read this, it says that it adds an aura-like trail to the main pet, enhancing its presence with a radiant shifting glow. If all it does is cosmetically make the main pet look cooler, it's like kind of a wasted passive in my opinion. However, if that glow does do damage or something, then it actually is like a trail of damage behind the active pet, and that would be perfectly fine. So like if it actually does damage, it's somewhere up in here. Because it's a trail that follows the active pet. It has to, like, the horde have to get behind them. So it's not great, but it would still be doing damage. If it's just like a cosmetic thing, then it's like, all right, fun to have and like fun of like having Rudolph in your inventory. But like most people aren't going to have Cloudhoof if he was a one-time pet for a special event that cost a ton of money to get. So Storm Griffin's got an interesting passive. Storm Griffin's passive adds 25% pushback to your active pet. So if your active pet is standing on horde, it pushes the horde back. I have personally not had a lot of success running the Griffin passive because I haven't been able to figure out how to utilize it effectively. That being said, people that are better at this game than I am have said that it's really strong and super helpful in Nightmare mode. So I'm going to trust them because whenever Hax tells me something, he's right. And so if Hax tells me that this passive is good, it's a good passive. And he uses it in Nightmare mode as a way to keep the horde away when he's running like some of the harder chapters or when he's trying to farm Nightmare mode. And so I trust him and I will work to figure out exactly how this passive works. So it's a skill issue. It's not a passive pet issue, but it is also not doing damage, and so it's better for something like Nightmare mode, probably like hard mode arena, anything where like you have to keep the horde away. So a good passive, but like more situational, kind of like Snails. Next up is Monkey, Elemental Bonobos or something like that. Very much like Lotus, they throw banana peels that does elemental damage. You get these guys from enchanted eggs. So like fun to collect, not one you're ever really going to use. So like, you know, like down here in the little bees maybe. Pyrokraken, he's a little bit harder to use. So I ended up using Pyrokraken as a main and his passive is totally fine, but it just feels a little worse than Emberpaw's. Emberpaw's is great. Like that, like a visual thing that does tick damage, like that feels really good. Pyrokraken is active pet attacks have a chance of 5% to spawn a bomb to hit the target. These bombs deal 200% of the passive pet's damage. So you're going to deal 200% of Pyrokraken's damage every 5% of the time. I like this in Boss Brawl because you're attacking the same boss. You know where that 5% is going to go. It's going to go right on the boss. I'm a big fan of Pyrokraken's passive. Especially if you have a ranged pet as your active, this will guarantee that that bomb is hitting something that's probably of value, and it doesn't require them to move around to do the damage. So I'm a big fan of Pyrokraken. I usually run him as a main. I suggest running him as a main earlier in the game because he's ranged, but it's got an excellent passive to use on any other kind of ranged active pet that you have. So Strikers are an interesting case here. Strikers used to be really strong when their abilities would impact both the active pet's basic attacks and the active pet's abilities, and it's not supposed to do that second one anymore. In theory, it should not be impacting the geysers of something like the Basilisk, and it definitely doesn't get impact like Emberpaw's passive. That was huge. Basically, you could do Earthstriker and Emberpaw passive, and that circle would slow enemies, and that doesn't work anymore. However, I gotten visual proof from Spider-Pig that he goes by a bunch of different names, so I'm sorry if Spider-Pig's not his official one, but that's what he is in my DMs. Earthstriker passive does apply to Blazetail's ultimate, which means that Blazetail's ultimate will slow everything. And so that's actually like really strong. I needed to test it more with, I'm going to try and test it with Crystalsaurus. Unfortunately, I don't have passive Earthstriker at the moment, but I'm working on leveling one up so that I can see if his passive will apply to the Crystalsaurus ultimate. If we read the Earthstriker passive, it's base attacks have 100% chance to slow for 1 second. So right, base attacks. But if it works for the ultimate, especially for something like, so for like Blazetail, where the ultimate does deal damage to everything on the screen, it slows the whole screen. So you basically get Basilisk ultimate with Blazetail's damage. It makes Earthstriker very strong in terms of like that like niche use for the passive. Slowing one horde doesn't do a whole lot of good. You need to slow a whole lot of horde. So it's got upside, I guess, but let's say like B+ relative to like these other elementals. Next up is Owl. Owl I'm not a huge fan of. It generates random little areas of damage. It says 50% damage. I don't know if it's passive pet or active pet. I'm guessing it's passive pet because that's what Pyrokraken and Emberpaw do, and it's in the same tier of rare. My big issue with that is like it's just random, and so it doesn't always hit Horde, and you can't really like have any kind of way of enforcing that it does. So with Emberpaw, you can make sure that like you have a melee pet, and with Basilisk, it's whoever the pet's attacking will get the bombs. With Owl, it's just anywhere on the battlefield will have like this small gust area that will do damage. I'm not a huge fan of it, but like if you have a Basilisk in these 3 rares, like feel free to run it with like Pyrokraken or with Emberpaw, right? Like they're all 3 in the same ballpark. It's just a matter of like personal preference on like which one you like the best. This little mouse guy, unfortunately, is like super bad. This is probably the worst pet passive in the game. At least with Cloudhoof, you look pretty. With this mouse guy, he adds 10% of his damage to the active pet's damage. And so as a base pet that can like barely get up to like level 100, he's not going to be doing any kind of damage. This is like a really poor passive. Doesn't add any slows, doesn't add any burn, doesn't add any effects. Just adds like a slight little bit more damage to your active pet. So like if you don't for some reason have any other pets, sure, make him a passive, but he's a base tier. You're going to have better pets. Like, don't really use his passive or anything. And then lastly is Blazetail. Blazetail has the highest damage passive in the game. Create 2 stationary fire orbs. Each orb has an AoE area. Enemies within the area receive 50% weapon damage per second. This ability has a 7-second cooldown. 50% weapon damage, that means that it's the hero's damage. So when your hero is doing a ton of damage, then these little fire orbs are doing a ton of damage. And so it's based off of hero weapon damage, which is like the only time in this besides the snail where anything is based off of the hero's damage and not one of the pets. And so it will do a ton of damage. Blazetail is just like this damaged AoE machine. It was a one-time special pet that like just literally outblasts everybody else in terms of damage. Okay, and so that's my general tier list, right? Like you're gonna have, and this kind of follows form where the two of the legendary pets have some of the best passives. Basilisk again is just great because it's a 20% critical strike chance to your pet, which means you're just upping the pet's damage by like roughly like 10%. You have Basilisk here, then you have the other 2 epic pets here. Shellshock can do a bunch of damage. I mean, this might be like in here somewhere. This again works better for melee because you're going to have 2 spinning turtle shells around your pet, and so that will help them out. You need to be like in top of the horde to do the damage. Griffin and Snail have like very particular niche use nightmare focus, so let's actually switch these up a bit. So like these are a little bit more niche use, but still strong, and then these guys will do more damage. So let's do a little bit of rearranging here. Emberpaw is great. Emberpaw is also a visual passive that's like clearly obvious, which makes it a lot more fun to play. So I know that like that might not matter a ton, but like Shellshock and like Emberpaw, like seeing the ability happen makes playing it much more fun. So I really like that. That's the big issue with Basilisk because you just don't see the damage happening, which isn't great. Crystalsaurus has a great passive, and again, this is the kind of thing like as you're leveling him up, feel free to put him as your passive. It's very strong. It's better than the other rare pet passives. So I'll run through now some like very typical setups in the game. The general rule of thumb with pets is put your highest rarity pet as your main, and then your next 2 highest rarity pets as your passives, and you'll be doing the right thing 90-95% of the time. So early in the game, right, you're running one of these 2 rares as your main, and then the other one as your passive, and then probably a striker as your second passive. That's how I would recommend it. You could also run a boar as your passive if you're running Emberpaw to have Emberpaw move around the map faster and do more damage. As you get epics, unfortunately, Storm Griffin will not be a great use of his passive until like later in the game in Nightmare mode. So once you get Crystalsaurus leveled up, then you're going to move Basilisk over to your passive. And I've been running Emberpaw as my second passive because Crystalsaurus gets in the fray and is always melee attacking stuff. Does a really good job of getting Emberpaw's passive to apply to a bunch of people. You have one of these like special rare awesome pets, like feel sure just plug them in basically like where you would have one of these other like equivalent level pets. So like if you have Shellshock, you could run him as your main and then use Basilisk as your passive, that kind of thing. Or right, you could run Crystalsaurus with Basilisk and Shellshock would be a great setup. And then Blazetail should be your main, but again, until he's your main, you can use his passive is great. So in Nightmare mode, and Crystalsaurus is your main pet and 2 Snails. I've had that as my best setup for clearing the hardest chapter in the game, 202. For other forms of Nightmare mode, right, Basilisk with 2 Snails is also a fantastic setup. And according to hacks, like Hydrobasilisk with a Storm Griffin and a Snail is also a great setup, or Hydrobasilisk with Storm Griffin and Emberpaw. So I'm Colt. I'm a high-level HVH player. Hopefully this was helpful in thinking through the different pet passives throughout the different parts of the game. You can find me here on Reddit or on Discord. Feel free to ask me questions. I'm always happy to answer. If you want priority access to answers, you can follow me on Patreon and become an executive producer. Cake Invictus is the executive producer of this video, so thank you to him for helping making this possible. And remember, always do your adventures!